All right, thank you. Over to you, Yvonne.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your attendance today on behalf of my fellow board members and the president of BPIA, Alexandra Baloney. I would like to welcome you to today's professional development webinar on negotiating salary increases and promotion. Before I introduce our speaker today, let me offer you a quick overview on Black professionals in international affairs. We were founded in 1989, and our goal is to expand the opportunities role of minorities in global affairs in general and in professional and leadership position in the global arena in particular. BPIA fulfills its objective through educational events, networking activities, mentoring, scholarships, and professional workshops like this one that you're attending today. We invite you to become members of BPIA if you are not already a member, and we have some exciting events in the pipeline for this year. For today's event, you might have noticed that we are holding it in honor of Women's History Month. While we feel our entire membership will benefit from this webinar, it's importantly special for Black women. Based on 2020 data, Black women in the United States who work full-time year-round are typically paid 64 cents for every dollar paid to a white non-Hispanic man. Compare that to the overall average of women, which is 83 cents for every dollar paid to white men. Even in Washington, D.C., where many of us reside, and with a particularly large population of Black women in D.C. are paid a shocking 49 cents for every dollar to white men. The National Partnership for Women and Families estimate that if the wages gap between Black women and white men, Black women could afford more than 2.5 years of childcare, 16 additional months of premium health insurance, more than 3 years worth of food for their families, or more than 22 months of the average rental cost. While discrimination no doubt plays a large role in explaining these disparities, we also need to ask for what we are owed and what we bring to us today when we discuss salaries and promotions. We are delighted today to have Ms. Sharon Schwab here with us today. She is the current Chief Program Officer for Fellowship and Career Development at the Robertson Foundation for Government. Prior to her work there, Sharon was a career coach at the George Washington University Elliott School of International Affairs, where she provided guidance to graduate students and alumni on the strategic and successful achievement of their professional goals. We're so delighted that she's here with us today. She also has a background in public service, having served as an associate director to the White House Presidential Personnel Office and as a press assistant in the Office of Public Affairs at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Following her presentation, there will be an open Q&A, so please put your questions in the chat as she presents, and I will bring them in at the end. As a reminder, given that this is a virtual setting, please remain on mute until I call on you during the Q&A. Either enter your question in the chat or use the raise hand function within Zoom. Again, Sharon, we are so happy to have you here to share with us today your wealth of experience. So now turn it over to you now. Please, let's give Sharon our undivided attention.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. That was wonderful. And I appreciate you going over my bio as well. So now I don't have to. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to share my screen. We have a lot of information to get through because these are really important topics. And oftentimes there's a lot of questions. So if I'm going very quickly, please, like Yvonne mentioned, do not hesitate to throw your questions into the chat because I want to be able to answer any and all of them. So I want to start with the topic of salary negotiation. And, a lot of times when I'm sitting down with students, the thing that strikes me most is that they're afraid to negotiate. A lot of times they're like, do I even need to negotiate? Should I negotiate? Especially if a student's pursuing an opportunity in the federal government, they feel like they can't negotiate. Even in the federal government, where there's not as much wiggle room to negotiate. Across the board in these different sectors, I wholeheartedly want you to ask and to negotiate, because just like when you're going into a negotiation and you have a range or a figure in mind, and you're going to give yourself a little bit of a cushion because you realize you might have to compromise and maybe come down, the employer is doing the exact same thing. So they are going to give you a number lower than what they are actually able to pay because they're expecting you to negotiate. So I would definitely say, first and foremost, when we're talking about both salary and promotion negotiations, make sure that you take the time to negotiate and don't be afraid to do so. Now, another integral part, honestly, for both of these, both salary and promotion negotiations, you have to do your research. Focusing once again on salary, there are two buckets that I often coach students on focusing on when it comes to doing your research and preparation for a salary negotiation. The first thing you want to be looking at, or first bucket, is your personal finances. So this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the big hitters when it comes to doing your research so you feel prepared and you feel educated to be able to negotiate successfully when it comes to a salary. One of the big things that a lot of students fail to do, or I would just say a lot of young professionals fail to do, is they fail to think about what does that salary look like post-taxes, or after they've taken out Social Security, or after they've taken out if you contribute to your retirement or to a healthcare plan or things like that. And so when they get that first paycheck, they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much lower than I thought it was going to be, because they haven't taken the time to actually calculate, once that salary has all of those other factors removed from it, what is actually your net income or the net take-home pay? And so I would definitely say when you're thinking about or researching in preparation for a salary negotiation, take the time to do the math in terms of what is this actually going to look like after all of those factors have been removed. So you can actually see, is this going to be sufficient for my financial goals or for my financial needs? That being said, other things you want to be taking into account, I would set up a budget so you know what your living expenses are. I would also look into, are there any payments that you have to make, for instance, student loans? Are there any savings goals that you're trying to work towards? Maybe you want to buy a house. Maybe you want to go on an amazing vacation and backpack through Europe. Maybe you want to save up for a wedding ring. Maybe you want to save up to get a pet. Whatever your savings goals are, take time to look really carefully at your finances so that you don't negotiate for or accept a salary and then realize this is insufficient. I would also say take some time to think about benefits from this job that have monetary value. Are they going to, help you cover student fees or student tuition? Are they going to give you extra time off? Are they going to give you a more flexible work environment or work schedule? Because that way you don't have to spend as much time commuting. Are you going to have the opportunity to go to conferences, or do they have funds for their employees to do professional development? That might help you reach your career goals and, take less money out of your pocket. So make sure you're taking some time to do that research so you can negotiate for those factors. Because oftentimes in the negotiation process, students focus so much on the dollar amount that they forget all these additional benefits that really do have a monetary value. Now, apart from personal finances, I also want you to research the industry and the employer. Some of the resources that I would definitely say are most popular are places like Glassdoor or Comparably. There are a host of different ones out there. Because these are entities that are doing research and they are also having people self-report salaries, I would always cross-reference that against another source. So that can mean checking a couple of different places online or talking to someone in that particular industry, which brings me to the second bullet. You want to be using your alumni or your network in terms of your professional aspect there. Make sure you're talking to folks. You don't have to ask them, hey, how much do you make? But you can say to them, I'm doing some research in preparation for this job. And I see on Glassdoor that it typically pays between 40 and 50,000. Does that sound accurate? They can tell you whether or not your research that you're finding online is actually, of service and accurate to what the current day salary is for that particular role. You also can utilize resources like career services, which is the job that I was previously in. So a lot of time career services, they are talking very frequently to recruiters or to alumni, and they have those figures as well that they can share with you. If you are looking at the federal space, I would also make sure you look up the GS pay scale. You can do that really easily on OPM's website. Honestly, all you have to do is just Google OPM, GS pay scale, and it will come up. The link that it takes you to actually shows you the GS pay scale for different parts of the country. And so you can look up the GS pay scale for Washington, D.C., which actually I will show you in a future slide. Or if you're thinking, I want to work in Los Angeles for the federal government, you can see what, say, a GS9 is in Los Angeles versus Washington, D.C. I already talked a little bit about the job benefits, but you definitely want to make sure this particular employer, as it sits within the industry at large, are you getting the best benefits package that you possibly can? And then, of course, you also want to be taking into account location and cost of living. The three most expensive cities are New York, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C., unfortunately. So I know that for a lot of you, you're predominantly looking at Washington, D.C. That's a higher cost of living place. You want to make sure that your salary fits that locale. And a lot of jobs in DC, unfortunately, do not. And so you want to make sure that you're doing your research so that you can be in a financially stable and successful position if you're going to take this role, or if you're going to be negotiating for a particular salary. Now, let's get down to the nuts and bolts. You're preparing because you have a strong feeling that they're going to make you that job offer. And you want to be able to feel ready to go when it comes to negotiating this particular salary. I would definitely say the tradition is to offer a $10,000 range whenever you're talking about salary for a particular role. There's a little bit of wiggle room here, especially if you were doing some research and your industry doesn't pay as high. So the industry that comes most often to mind is the nonprofit space. So there the salary bands are much, much tighter. And so maybe if you're going for a job in that particular industry, you want to do like a $5,000 range. But overall, $10,000 is standard. Now, a couple different things when you are putting forth a $10,000 range or your range for that particular job, always take into account what I like to call the anchor, which is the bottom of that range. Just like we talked about at the onset of this particular presentation, you want to give some wiggle room for negotiation. So I recommend making the bottom of your range a little bit higher than what you're actually willing to accept. Now, you need to take your industry into account. Private sector, especially if you're going for some of the big ones like Facebook or Spotify or Amazon, they probably have a little bit more wiggle room in their budget. So maybe you make the bottom of your range $5,000 to $10,000 more than what you're willing to accept. If you're going for a nonprofit or maybe a think tank or maybe a job on Capitol Hill where you know there's not as much room to negotiate, maybe you make the bottom of your range $2,000 to $5,000 more than you're willing to accept. But the key lesson here is, based on your research, give some room for negotiation. Now, another question I often get is, when do I even mention this range? And so I've put the three most common instances. Informational interviews is one. So say, for instance, you're talking to an alum from your university, or you're talking to someone in your professional network, and they ask you, what's kind of like your ideal salary range? Or even maybe you're talking to a recruiter and they ask you what your ideal salary range is. That would be a great instance to be able to mention the salary range, always bearing in mind to give some room for negotiation. Sometimes when you're applying for a job in the cover letter, they want you to mention, what is your expected salary range? Same thing, list a $10,000 range, leaving room at the bottom of your range for negotiation. And then, of course, this is the one that gets people really nervous. You're in that interview and they ask you right before things wrap up, what are your salary expectations, or what is your projected salary for this particular role? Do not feel like you have to launch into a really long answer. Provide them the range with a little bit of justification. once again, $10,000 or $10,000 range with a little bit of room for negotiation. Now, they have made you the offer. You're excited. You're so ready to negotiate for this. Now, a couple of different things you want to be thinking about here. First and foremost, typically speaking, when they make you that job offer, they're going to make you that job offer either over the phone or in an email. If it's over the phone, do not feel like you have to negotiate on the spot. Do not feel like you have to, say yes to that particular offer at that particular juncture. You can express your enthusiasm and say, thank you so much for selecting me for this particular role. Can you send me all of these details that you just shared with me over the phone in an email so I can review it? The benefit of having an email is, typically speaking, you can just reply at that juncture and say, hey, I'm really excited about this particular opportunity. Can you send me the actual offer and that particular contract in an email? So essentially, the piece I want you to take from here is, do not feel like you have to say yes. Do not feel like you have to negotiate in that moment. It's actually better for you to get the full hiring contract. So whether they make the offer by phone or by email, get that contract so you can review it. Now, you've reviewed that particular contract. Now it's time to respond for your counteroffer. There are two things I want you to bear in mind when you're preparing your counteroffer. Number one, this is your opportunity to ask any questions. So if there's anything in that hiring contract that is, unclear or vague, or you have questions about it, ask. Second, I recommend for your first counteroffer, responding with a range. Now, they have told you initially, here's where we're at. Assuming we'll just throw numbers out. Say they offer you $55,000 for a particular role. And you're like, okay, I've done my research. I know that they can probably pay closer to 60, maybe even 65. I would respond with a range. I would make that range a little bit higher so that there's even more room for negotiation. So I might say, can we get something closer between 62 and 65, for instance? Now here's the clincher.
Okay,
And this is the part where all your research is going to come into play. Make sure that you have justified why you are asking for that response and that range. A couple of different options for justifying your counteroffer. It could be your experience. Say, for instance, for this particular role, they're looking for someone with a bachelor's and 1 to 3 years of experience, but you have a master's and you also have 1 to 3 years of experience. Say also that maybe they're asking for someone who has international experience and has been abroad at least once, but you've been abroad multiple times. You can talk about your experience and why you should be paid higher on their salary band. You can also talk about unique skills. This could be familiarity with a technical software that they're looking at or that they need for this role. It could be fluency in a particular language. It could be, the ability to give public speeches or write press releases. Talk about your skill set. Why is that of greater value to this company or to this employer? I already mentioned education level, but you can definitely leverage that as well. You might even be able to leverage special circumstances. For instance, if you require a certain accommodation, or there are certain things like you are offering to be virtual or to be hybrid, and that is something different than what they were originally thinking about for that particular role. But then I would also say, think about the industry itself. All of this research that you've done about this employer, their salary, et cetera. Think about that so you can then say, based on my research or based on talking to some of the employees at your company who went to my home university, I think something in the range of 62 to 65 is more appropriate for this particular role, or is more competitive in the market value for this role. You want to be able to provide a justification as to why you were putting forth this counteroffer with this higher range. Now, I want to go back to phone versus email. There are pros and cons to presenting your counteroffer by phone versus by email. When it comes to by phone, if you feel like you're a skilled negotiator and you feel comfortable doing this by phone, there is a strong benefit to it. Because typically speaking, if you're going to negotiate with someone on the phone, they won't have the luxury of going back and asking if, HR or what have you, is this range okay? They might actually be willing to give you a higher number because you've put them on the spot. Now, I will say the vast majority of folks don't feel comfortable negotiating on the phone. I am one of those. My husband loves negotiating on the phone. He is a skilled negotiator and he really loves to push people's buttons in that particular regard. It's not my forte. That's perfectly fine. You can still negotiate just as assertively via email. And a lot of times the benefit of email, while you aren't putting someone on the spot, and so they now also have time to think about their response to your counteroffer, the benefit of email is everything's in writing. So you never have to feel like, oh, they're going to retract what they said because you have it in writing. I would also say for email, sometimes it's really helpful because you feel like you can get the wording just right, or you can talk about your justification using the language you want and take time to review it. You can send it to a career services person. You can send it to your family and friends. So email does have some benefits as well. The key thing I would say when presenting your counteroffer and you're trying to make that decision, phone versus email, think about what is most advantageous to you, what fits your personality type, what fits your strengths. Key points here, respond with that range and justify your reasoning. Now, the employer is going to respond. In an ideal scenario, the employer is going to say, you know what, 62 to 65 works for us. How about 62.5? Which is great. You're going to celebrate. You can still push the envelope there if you would like and counteroffer one more time. But most folks, I would definitely say, if the employer is that agreeable, we'll sign the contract and move forward. Now, the employer might play hardball and they might say no, or they literally just financially, they're not in the best position to be able to go to the top of their range. So they might stick to their original offer of 55. Or what happens in most instances is they will compromise. They will say, we can't go as high as 62, up to 65, but how about 60? You still have one more opportunity to counter. Now, the difference with your second counteroffer and your first counteroffer is typically by the second counteroffer, we are working within a very small window of space in terms of numbers. So in that particular regard, a couple of things I would say here, rather than a range, offer a number. So say, for instance, they compromised and they said 60, and you really want to push to 62. You've done your research, after taxes that this is the ideal place for you to be based on your savings goals, your financial situation. 62 is the least that you can accept. So you're going to hold your guns to that. But respond with a number. You still want to justify the reasoning. And then the other piece I would say here is usually by the second counteroffer, this is also where a lot of times in the negotiation process, you can bring in other benefits. So say, for instance, you want more options to telework. Say, for instance, you want professional development funding. Say, for instance, you want the employer to pay for a company car or for a company laptop. Say, for instance, you want the employer to give you the opportunity to work from international locations, or maybe you want them to be able to, give you better benefits as it pertains to like stock options. Whatever it is, a lot of times at this juncture, especially since we're working in such a small window as it pertains to money, think very carefully and think about what matters most. Say, for instance, you really want 62, but they're offering 60. Is it more worth getting that extra 2,000, or would a different type of benefit be of greater monetary value to you? So think very carefully, and this is why that research all at the beginning is so important, because now you can speak very intelligibly and you can decide very effectively about what matters most to you, and you can put forward the best counteroffer possible. Now, the employer is going to once again respond. They could say yes and agree to your counteroffer. Typically at that particular juncture, if they have agreed to what you were asking for, I would sign the hiring contract and I would move forward. They could say no. This is pretty rare. This would be a situation where either they are in financial dire straits or they feel like they can go with another candidate who's going to take the much lower salary. But they could say no and they cannot budge. If that's the case, you have to make the decision. Do I accept 55 or do I walk? It is perfectly okay, I get this question a lot, to turn down an offer. Do it professionally, thank them for their time, and move forward. Or they could compromise. So maybe they give you certain concessions as it pertains to different benefits that you've asked for. Maybe they go up a little bit in the salary. Whatever the compromise is, evaluate it. You can still say no if it doesn't meet what you absolutely need financially or professionally. Same thing. Be professional about declining the offer, thank them for their time, and move forward. Or maybe that compromise is excellent and you're really happy about it. Put together a new contract and move forward. Now, it's very important as you are completing the negotiation process, do not sign any contract unless it includes all of the negotiated parameters. So make sure that they have updated that hiring contract with everything that was agreed on, and that is the document you sign. Now, one piece I do want to say throughout this entire process is, yes, you want to be assertive. Yes, you want to be confident. You don't want to accept less than what you need financially or what you deserve based on your qualifications. However, a lot of people go into negotiations thinking they have to be a lot of bravado or a lot of aggression. Remember that if you do accept this offer, you are working with these people. So in that particular sense, be professional, show appreciation. They picked you for this potential opportunity. So act accordingly as you are negotiating throughout. Now, I'm looking at time because I want to be able to make sure we have enough. And actually, I'm going to skip this piece where normally I would have us go through a couple of exercises because I want to make sure we leave enough time for questioning and I want to make sure we have enough time for the promotion piece. So really quickly, all of the parameters I just talked about pertain to salary negotiation across the board. But I want to say something very special about GS salary negotiation. Now, typically speaking in the federal government, because there are a lot of rules and regulations when it comes to paying employees, the wiggle room for negotiation isn't as wide. And there are a lot of rules that someone in HR has to follow. So for instance, say for instance, they are offering you a salary at the GS9 level. So that's grade 9. They will likely not bump you up to a 10 or an 11. Usually that is beyond the parameters. So I often tell students when you're negotiating a GS salary, do not expect to go up a level, but you can go up a step. And so as you can see, there are different steps with each of the potential levels. And actually, depending on where you are, you can actually increase that salary pretty substantially through these different steps. Now, once again, there are limitations. So if you were offered a GS9 step 1, for instance, you're not going to be able to probably negotiate up to a GS step 5 and above. So you want to think within reason. It's going to be a small window, but you might be able to negotiate up to a step 3. And so I just want you to have a sense of when you are looking at salaries and you were thinking about this GS pay scale, what is feasible? And the nice thing is, you can literally see this is what the money is going to look like. And they update this every single year. Now, I talked about earlier the importance of justification. That is important across the board, but it is super important when it comes to negotiating a GS salary. There are a lot of rules and regulations that HR has to follow. A lot of that has to deal with, they have to, in case of an audit or in case their boss wants to know, why did you give this person a GS step 3 instead of a GS step 1? They have to be able to account for that. And the way that they account for it is through the job description. So if you're applying to different opportunities, say for instance on USA Jobs or something of the like, make sure you save that job description. Go back to it. Under the requirements section, or there's a requirements tab, usually on a USA Jobs application, there's a qualifications section that says, here's how you qualify for this job by education. Here's how you qualify for this job by experience. And there's also a section that says how you'll be evaluated, which includes additional qualifying parameters. Focus on those sections. They state in very plain language, to get a GS-9, for instance, you must have blank. To get a GS-11, for instance, you must have blank. Go back, and when you were justifying this to HR, you want to demonstrate how do you meet those qualifications, or better yet, exceed them. So an example could be, say for instance, to be able to qualify for this particular job at a GS-9, you must have 1 year of relevant experience conducting analysis on Latin American affairs for a member of Congress. Sometimes it's that specific. You can then go back to HR and say, I would like to negotiate for a higher GS step level based on the fact that I have done this for more than the required years for this position. And I have actually done this for 2 to 3 years, which is more than double. So in that particular sense, that's how you want to justify to HR, because that's how they will justify it to their superiors why they agreed to pay you a higher salary. And so the key things when you're thinking about a federal position is you want to really make sure that you are going by the letter, focusing on the keyword language from the qualifications portion of that job description, and showing how you meet or exceed those qualifications. Now, I want to talk about negotiating for a promotion. You will find that a lot of the steps are the same as for a salary. Now, first and foremost, you are sitting here, you're super excited, you love where you work, you feel that it is time for that promotion. Just like you did with a salary, you want to sit down and do your research. So one of the key things I would have you take a look at, what are the expectations or responsibilities of the new role? Just like even when we were just talking about for the GS pay scale, how have you already met or potentially exceeded the expectations of this new role? You also want to do some research, just like you did for a salary negotiation. You want to think about what's a reasonable salary increase for this particular position. And that may vary based on industry. That also may vary based on employers. Just like before, you can use resources like Glassdoor or Comparably. You also can use your professional network or career services. You can talk to people, maybe people who are more senior than you, maybe a colleague who works at a comparative company. Hey, when you argued for your promotion, what was a reasonable range? This is what I'm seeing online. This is what I'm hearing from other people. Does this sound accurate? I would also say be very sensitive to the timing of your request. You want to make sure that in terms of the timing of your particular request, that you are being very, very in tune with what is the temperature at your company. Are they in a good financial situation? You know, if it's, COVID-19 just started and it's 2020 and the economy is going down, not the best time to ask for a promotion. But also I would say, think about it. There's rapid inflation right now, or maybe the company just did a merger, or maybe that particular organization didn't get what they asked for in the budget from the federal, at the federal level. Do some research, look through what is the temperature at this particular company to figure out, is this the best time to go for that promotion? And then also I would give some thought. A lot of people feel like they have to get a promotion just because it's time. But how does that actually fit in with your professional development and financial goals? And also I would even venture to say your personal goals. I've had a lot of, when I've coached folks who are at mid-career where they're like, I went for this promotion, but now I have no time with my family. Or I went for this promotion, I didn't really think about the commitment, and now I have to travel a lot. Think through, is this actually the move that you want to make? And then of course, just like we were talking about earlier, it's a negotiation. So I would also begin to think through what concessions or what areas are you willing to compromise on as part of this negotiation process. And also think through, if I'm vying for this promotion, don't just think about how's my salary going to increase, but are there any additional benefits that come with going to this higher level? Now, I would definitely say make sure you take some time to prepare your talking points. And I love this photo. I saw that American University, they have their students when they do negotiation for salaries or promotions. They have this class where they have them practice with dogs. And I absolutely love that because that's what I do with my dog all the time. When I'm preparing for remarks or I'm preparing to negotiate, I honestly use my dog as a potential audience. And the big thing I want you to do as a takeaway here is I want you to practice. A lot of times folks feel less nervous when it comes to negotiating salary, but they feel more nervous sitting down with their boss and asking for a promotion. So make sure you're taking some time to feel comfortable, to get those nerves out. Now, a couple different things I would say. Make sure you're being very clear on what you're asking for. A lot of times when students had come back to me and they talked about how the discussion went, they were all over the place. Sit down and think through, okay, how do I want to ask this question? Don't bury the lead. Make sure you are upfront with your superior and say, hey, based on these factors, I would like to discuss the potential for a promotion. Be clear about it. This is a big one. A lot of times when folks are going into a promotion discussion or promotion negotiation, they focus on what is this promotion going to do for me? But for your employer, when they're sitting there thinking like, why should we promote you? And why should we, you dedicate extra funds or extra attention towards giving you this advancement? For them, they want to know like, how is this going to add value to us, to our team, to me as your manager? So focus on how, by going into this new role, you can add value to that particular institution. Just like we talked about earlier, you want to really underscore how you've exceeded expectations in your current position. I would talk about where you've gone above and beyond, or I would talk about past really successful performance reviews, or I would talk about things like, as an example where you took on a project or you helped another team, or where you are already fulfilling the job or the responsibilities of the promoted role. So take, for instance, if you're trying to get a promotion from that entry-level position and you're trying to move more so into management, talk about maybe how you've supervised the interns, or talk about how you manage the entire budget for a particular project. Show them that leadership and management quality that you're already exhibiting in your current position, and why that shows them that you deserve to move into this new role. It is very important that you use quantifiable data if you have it. And so just like you would sit down with your resume and you would try and think through, okay, what's the percentage increase? Or how have I saved the company money? Or how many people have I supervised? Or how much extra hours have I worked on this particular project? Use quantifiable data to be able to justify in your negotiation why this promotion is good for you and why you deserve it, but also potentially how are you going to add that extra monetary value or that extra time saver if they promote you into this new role. And just like we started out here, practice, practice, practice. Once again, I can't tell you how many folks that I've coached where they're like, this is the most nerve-wracking thing. So get the nerves out. Sit down with your roommate, your spouse, your best friend, your parents, whoever. Practice the talking points. I would also say, if it's helpful, practice the compromises. So if you were sitting there and you're like, I'm going to make a concession here. So let's role play and essentially walk through if my boss responds in this way. Practice that so that it doesn't take you aback when you have to do it, for lack of a better word, live. Now, I definitely encourage this meeting to be in person, if possible. I just feel that there is a lot of value to being able to look someone in the eye and for them to be able to read your body language and for you to read theirs as well. But I know in today's virtual environment that may not be possible. So get as close as you possibly can to meeting in person. A couple of different things here. Be confident. My mother always told me when I was younger, she was like, the worst thing they can say is no. So you might as well try. Be confident. Go for this. If it helps, and I've done this before, especially when I was younger, I would sit down with my friends and I'd be like, walk me through, like, help me go through these talking points as to why I deserve this raise, this promotion. Honestly, sometimes hearing it from other people reminds you of how awesome you are and how much you've contributed to this particular employer and how passionate you are about their mission. This will boost your confidence so you can walk in and be confident and be positive and be clear about what you want and what you deserve. Absolutely be prepared for a counteroffer. Your boss, more likely than not, is probably going to have a counteroffer or some compromises in mind. Now, one of the most common ones is it's not the right time. So they might say, you know, the company is not in a financial position to be able to do this at this particular time. This is something that we can reevaluate in 6 months to a year. If that happens, make sure that you determine a way forward. I would set a date and I would follow up with your particular supervisor, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks even, before that timeline is reached. You know, if your supervisor says, let us get through the fiscal season or let us get through this fiscal year and then we can reevaluate it, I would mark that calendar. If it's related to salary, where they say like, you know, we can't really justify, like, I'd love to be able to promote you right now, but we can't really afford it. This might be a situation where you could say, is this something we can afford at a future date and time? This is also something where you could talk about other forms of compensation, other areas where there might be monetary value. So once again, thinking about what concessions are you able to make or that you are willing to make, and then also what are some other things that have monetary value that will help you grow as a professional that maybe you can negotiate now and get that full promotion later. And this is less common, but I have gotten a good number of questions on it, where oftentimes they're willing to promote you. They might even give you a pay bump, but they can't technically give you that title for one policy reason or another. So for you, if you really are like, I've been at this organization for like 3 to 5 years, I really need to show that I've grown. Think about what is a potential lateral move. Can they expand your title? Can they show that you're in charge of not only your original office, but a side office? Is there a potential lateral move that you can make where they've given you that salary bump, but the title has changed to show that you're now overseeing something different? This is definitely a compromise that you can make when evaluating and when considering your employer's counteroffer. Now, after the negotiation's over and you have gotten either the title you want, the pay bump you want, or even potentially like the time frame that you want, I would make sure that when you are wrapping everything up, get it in writing. One of the biggest pieces is, what is the timeline for implementation? Is this going to take effect in a month, at the next pay period, at the next fiscal year? Get that timeline for when does this actually take? And I would also make sure that you get it absolutely in writing. A lot of times promotion discussions are had rather over email, they're had in person. And so you want to make sure that you are following up with your employer and with your supervisor saying, here's what we discussed. And I want to make sure it's in writing so that if there's any doubt in the future, that I have that as evidence. And sometimes even some employers will say, you write it up and I'll sign it. Now, a couple different things here, and then I want to leave some time for questions. And I apologize for going over a little bit. But some important pieces here is don't be afraid to ask. Be bold, be brave, don't be afraid to negotiate. Make sure you do your research. It makes negotiations so much easier because then you know where your line in the sand is. But it also makes you have a more competitive and effective negotiation because you can come up with different compromises. You can come up with strong counteroffers and you can Feel good at the end of the day about what you've decided to accept. Justify, 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 and use quantifiable data. Use core examples from your past experiences to be able to demonstrate, this is why I deserve this higher salary or this promotion. Don't forget to look into other benefits that have monetary value. Don't be afraid to take time to evaluate a potential offer. Even if you're talking to your supervisor and you're talking about a promotion and they give you a counteroffer, it's okay to say, I want to give some time to think this through. Can I follow up with you in 24 to 48 hours? Perfectly fine. Remember that if you get that promotion or if you accept that job offer, you're going to be working with these folks. And make sure throughout the negotiation process, you show appreciation, you are positive, and you are professional. Get the final agreement in writing, 100%. And then last but not least, don't be so hard on yourself. If it's your first time negotiating for promotion, or if it's your first time negotiating that salary and you're like, oh man, it didn't go the way I wanted it to, practice makes perfect. You're going to get it as you progress throughout your career. Every single time you do this, you'll become stronger at it. And I would also say, take some time to practice with your friends, your family, career coaches, people in your professional network, so that you can feel as confident as possible when you're going into these negotiations. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to take your questions.
Well, Sharon, thank you so much for that more than helpful information on the negotiation. I think that's one of the things that scares people. It's like, suppose I ask too much, suppose I don't ask enough. It's very, very important. And thank you for sharing those tips, as well as asking for a promotion. I think one of the things that I've heard throughout your presentation today was, in essence, don't sell yourself short. You never know what you're going to get, not unless you ask for it. You can always say no, and they can always say no, but make sure that you don't compromise yourself and then find out later that you could have asked for more. Someone stated in the chat that one thing about promotion, be intentional about it. Make sure that your supervisor knows what your expectations are, how you want to grow, and how you want to grow within the organization or within a particular division. It was really interesting listening to you today, having been a recruiter in the international scene, in the government scene, and in the NGO scene. Her points that were made today are right on target, especially when you're negotiating and knowing your worth. That's really, really important. We have a little bit of time for questions. So anybody have any particular questions they want to ask right now? Raise your hand or get off mute. I don't see any hands, and you can ask a question. So Chairman, I guess you did a wonderful job. There are no questions here. Everybody, I saw people frantically taking notes. And again, I want to thank you. This is recorded. I know some of you may want to go back and listen to it again. There were very, very valuable bits of information in here that will help you with that job seeking. Some of you are, there's job seeking or with promotion. Tommy Grant, you have a question?
Hi, everyone. Yvonne, thanks. One of the things I was thinking about, by the way, quite correct, Sharon, everything spot on. I've been working for at least 30 years, right? But I just love my BPIA programs and I want to be current. I want to know, well, what's the thinking today? My question is, you can be successful. That's the question. Can you be successful asking for alternatives? You did talk about benefits. Suppose you ask for more telework time or shorter work hours if money is not an option. What do you think about that? That's my question. Thanks a lot for everything.
Absolutely. You definitely can, especially after everything that we've been through the past 2 years with COVID-19. I feel like those particular topics, employers are very receptive to hearing. Now, I do think it's really important to justify your reasoning, just like you would with any other request. So if you were asking for more telework hours or you're asking for less hours, but for the same amount of pay, for instance, tell them how it's going to benefit them. I've seen some really incredible, the World Economic Forum has been putting out some really awesome articles about companies that are moving to 4-day work weeks. So like, can you present them with some quantifiable data about how you working less hours for the same amount is still going to be an improvement for them, is going to benefit the company? Or if you're going to be teleworking, tell them how that might benefit them. For instance, if you're teleworking and you live in another part of the country, for instance, you can say like, given I live in this new place and I'm allowed to telework and I'm not in Washington, D.C., I'm happy to do recruitment on the side for the company, with the universities in my local area. Or I'm more than happy to, do some outreach on behalf of the organization because I have that greater flexibility. Talk about how that arrangement is going to benefit them, in addition to how it's going to benefit you. So I definitely think any of those alternative things that have monetary value, or it might even just be personal value to you, talk about how that's going to be a benefit to the organization. I'll give you one quick example. So the organization that I currently work for, the Robertson Foundation for Government, when they approached me and I was negotiating for this particular role, I had the personal piece where my family wanted to move to Ohio, which is where I'm currently at. And I had to negotiate that because their headquarters are in Washington, D.C. And one of the things I argued is like, the organization is going to save so much more money by going completely virtual and giving up that lease in DC. Our team is small enough. I think we can be effective. The past couple of years have shown that in a completely virtual environment. And I'd be more than willing to travel to Washington, DC, if ever needed for programming. And, that argument of showing like they can save all this money by us going completely virtual as a team actually worked, and every single person on the team went virtual. So, show how that's going to be a benefit to the organization in addition to you.
Natalie, you had your hand up next.
Yes, ma'am. It's good to see you, Ms. Yvonne. Sharon, thank you so much. So I have a couple of questions, or maybe just the one. So what if you're in a situation where you are confident in advocating for yourself for the promotion, but you are working with a supervisor who is not willing to be that support to give you those tools or even to promote you, and they're always finding roadblocks? Like, what are some workaround? Is there a workaround around that outside of saying, thanks, here's my 2 weeks notice?
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes complete sense. I would definitely say like, whenever you're thinking about a job, like I often evaluate the team way more than I would evaluate like the role or the salary. That just weighs more to me because I'm like, I want people in my corner, So it may come down to that particular situation where you're like, I need to find a place where I feel appreciated. I feel like I can grow. They're going to invest in me. So it may come down to that. But some additional pieces that you could potentially look at in the interim is, are there some benefits that you aren't taking advantage of at that particular organization that can help you grow as a professional? Things that your supervisor can't necessarily deny you. A lot of times when I've talked to students and I'm like, hey, does your employer offer professional development funding? A lot of them just don't know. And then they go and they do the research and they're like, oh yeah, they give like $1,000 a year for professional development funding. So make sure that you are fully realizing everything that that organization can offer to you. I would also say, if your supervisor is not being that supportive or is being a roadblock, see if there's also something that you can go back to in terms of company policy. For instance, in the federal government, every single year, technically, you are supposed to be promoted one GS step. That is just policy. So in that particular sense, if your employer or your supervisor is not working with HR and getting that increase in pay for you, you can go to HR and you can advocate for yourself in that particular respect. And a lot of other companies have policies like that, where like after 3 years and you have positive performance reviews, you are entitled to blank. And so I would also be looking at, and are there any rules or regulations that you can utilize, in a professional but assertive way so that you can grow with that particular organization. And one more thing I would say, it doesn't necessarily always have to be a move out of the organization. It also could be a lateral one. If you love where you work, but your particular supervisor is not investing in you, is there another team at that organization that would be an ideal fit for you? So don't always feel like you have to make a drastic move. So those are a couple of different ideas.
Okay, our last question, Mr. Webb, you have a question?
I do, yes. First of all, thanks, Sharon. I thought this was a really great presentation and a lot of things that I wish I knew when I was applying for my first job. I kind of had to learn the hard way, but then also some new things as well. So my question is, when you're in a negotiation for either salary or promotion, how appropriate do you think it is to, let's say you've applied to multiple roles and you have multiple offers, how appropriate is it to negotiate, like maybe another offer was a higher salary, for example, or offered more benefits, something like that? Do you think it's appropriate to bring that into the negotiation? Like, yes, well, this person over here is offering me this, so I was hoping that you can meet it. Do you think that's an appropriate way to go about it, or would that be problematic?
That's a really good question. I would say that from my personal experience, I would say don't make that your only justification. But I think it's perfectly fine for it to be one of many things. I think the problem that a lot of people have done is they use it as their only leverage point, and then the employer's like, well, fine, go over to that team. But if you talk about, you guys are my first choice, here are the things I want to do to be able to advance your mission, here's the reasons why I am the ideal fit for this particular role and I can add value. In addition, like, I know based on market value and the fact that I have this other offer that a salary in this range makes more sense. Can we talk about a salary in this particular space? I would have it be one of your talking points and not your sole one. I think that's where people get into a lot of trouble. And the same thing with a potential promotion. If you're sitting there and you're like, I have performed well, I have exceeded expectations on my last 3 or 4 performance reviews, I have taken on additional responsibilities in this particular role that do not encompass my scope of work, and the fact that, I've been with the company for this number of years and I've increased output by this, I am confident that I am entitled to this particular opportunity, to this promotion. I also, if I can't get this particular promotion, I do have another potential opportunity that's going to give me that opportunity to grow as a professional. But my main goal is to stay here. Can we discuss increasing me to this managerial role or what have you? So make it one of your talking points. I think that's 100% fine, but I just wouldn't have it be your only one.
Well, Sharon, I want to have a big thank you. There was a lot for people to hear, to take in, to learn today. In addition, when Sharon talked about making sure you read whatever your offer is and understand that, but also when you're working in an organization, read their handbook, because at times there are things stated in the handbooks what it takes to grow within an organization. But Sharon, I know we're going to call you back. I know we need a repeat of this because I know there are many, many more questions that we could ask you today. But let's give Sharon a round of our gratitude and thank you for coming to us today. And it has just been wonderful listening to those tidbits that you have given us, because it's either there, I'm sure people will get that position that they're looking for or get that promotion, because your words are still ringing in our ears. This webinar was recorded, and you will be able to do a refresher on it to take those jot down those notes. Natalie, I saw you writing furiously that you didn't get an opportunity to take. Thanks again, everyone, for participating in BPIA's webinars. This is part of our professional development segment. If you are not a member, please go to our website and join. We have valuable webinars, one-on-ones. We offer lots of opportunity. This is something that's great for you to become a part of. It's us helping us and to continue to grow and to flourish in the international affairs arena. Thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And go on the website now and join BPIA. Thank you. Sharon, we'll be in contact with you again. Thanks so
Sounds
much
good.
for coming to talk with us today.
Oh, my honor and my pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I threw my contact information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Bye-bye.